Today, we're going to learn how to make a postural adjustment. So far, we've defined a few points on the body: the top of the sternum, rib 8, iliac, but we also need to define the directions in which we can move these points. To do that, you will need a book or any rectangular object, and a pencil or any similarly shaped object so that you can follow along. We need to define the words we're going to use in our adjustments because we need to have a clear understanding of what we're trying to do. The adjustments we're going to make are guided by orders for movements and the prevention of movements. These orders are not hopes or wishes. They are not poetic language. They are orders for actual movements. You need to genuinely understand the words you are using to construct the orders, if you want to consciously execute those orders. To define the directions in which we will move parts of the body, you will need your book and your pencil. To start, we will recall the rib 8 points that we defined in the last installment of this series. We can imagine a line connecting the two rib 8 points, and can refer to that as the rib line if we want. We are going to place the book against our body. We could place the spine of the book along the rib line, but we want the book to represent a plane, specifically the plane that the rib line would be on. So instead, we will place the book flat against our body, right there against our rib line. We will call this the frontal plane, or the plane of the ribs. In the future, we can consider which points on our body we want to be in front of the plane, which points we want to be behind the plane, and which points we want to be on the plane. But for now, we will use our conception of this plane to define the directions of movement that we will use in our adjustments. The first direction is forward, so grab your pencil and please use it to show what you would think forward in relation to this plane would mean. It's not a trick question. Forward is 90 degrees to the plane, essentially straight out in front of you. So if the order was you want to bring your elbows forward, forward means forward in relation to the plane of the ribs. There's an important thing to consider with this direction. Please keep the book against the plane of your ribs and the pencil facing forward, and lean with your torso. If you do this, you will see that what forward of the plane of the ribs means changes as you lean. If the plane of the ribs is angled, forward will be angled. The next direction we will define is backward, which is the opposite of forward. So if the order was to pull the bottom of your sternum backward, that would be backward in relation to the plane of the ribs. The next direction is up. Please grab your pencil and show what up along the plane of the ribs would mean. Again, not a trick question. Up is up along the plane. And we also have the direction down, which is the opposite. The final two directions are inward and outward. For these, we can imagine that there is a point on the rib line exactly in the center between your right rib 8 and your left rib 8. So with your pencil, show the direction of starting at that center point and going out away from the body. That is outward. Inward is the opposite. It's going from outside of the body in towards the center. So if the order is to point the elbow outward, outward means away from that center point, parallel to the rib 8 line. We no longer need the book and pencil. Now we have some specific points on our body that we can move in specific directions. For instance, we can pull the iliacs back and up away from the side of the knee, and know what back and up specifically mean. Movements are done in space and time. We have defined space, both the points on our body that we will move, and the directions through space that we can move them. We also need to put some parameters on time. To do this, we will use a count of 1, 2, 3 during our adjustments. We need to know when we're beginning an adjustment and when we're ending it, and we will do that by counting to 3. 1 will be the start of the adjustment. 2 will be the middle of the adjustment, and 3 will be the end of the adjustment. There is 1 second between 1 and 2, and 1 second between 2 and 3. That means an adjustment takes 2 seconds. So if the order is to pull the iliacs back and up away from the side of the knee, you would want to start moving the iliacs on 1, be moving the iliacs on 2, and stop moving the iliacs at 3. I want to emphasize that you really want to stop at 3. To take control over your movements, you need to be rationally in charge of when the adjustment starts and stops. And if you continue past 3, you will likely start using your feeling sense and not your rationality to guide the adjustment. When counting to 3, you want to make sure that you're not starting your adjustment prior to 1 and are not continuing your adjustment past 3. That might sound easy, but it can take a little time to get used to. In fact, many people have trouble at first doing a 1, 2, 3. Some people will spit out 1, 2, 3 and then make the adjustment. Some will say 1, start adjusting, and then when they think they've done what they wanted will quickly finish 2, 3. Often, people will make the adjustment before they've even started counting and then say 1, 2, 3 just before finishing. Or they will go very slowly and count 1, 2, 3. Going too quickly isn't a problem per se if you are genuinely starting at 1 and ending at 3, but if you can't help but go quickly, it is a concern that you can't decide to just do 1, 2, 3. This might sound a little strange or silly, but most people will struggle a little with this at first, and it's another indication of our general inability to control ourselves. It should be quite simple to say, I will start an adjustment at 1, do the adjustment through 2, and end at 3. But since most of us are completely unfamiliar with controlling our body so specifically, and even those with some training in using their body often have ingrained habits, this can actually be a bit of a stumbling block. But you will get past it with a little work. And if you have no problems, that is of course not the end of the journey, but simply the beginning. We now have the tools needed to start making adjustments, so I'll explain the basic setup of how to perform an adjustment. First, you will have your order, something like, I will pull the rib line up away from the iliacs. We know what the rib line is, we know what the iliacs are, and we know what up is. Second, you say the order in your mind or out loud, and use your memory to recall it. And thirdly, when the order is clear in your mind, you will do a count of 1, 2, 3 while performing the adjustment. After you have performed the adjustment, your feeling sense may not agree with the new configuration, and as a result, you might move right back to where you started. But the goal is to try to maintain the adjustment you've made. At first, that will seem almost impossible, because frequently you will have to use what seems like a lot of effort to move a bony structure during the adjustment. But in time, you will find that all that effort was only needed because the muscles involved in making the adjustment were so unfamiliar with being used that way, and that eventually you will be able to maintain the adjustment you've made fairly easily, because the adjustments will stretch your fascia, and that will provide you with support that you didn't have before. There are two important things to note here. First, this may sound too simple, and that's because I've given you a very simple example. Only at the very beginning would you use just one order. There will typically be multiple adjustments to be performed simultaneously. For instance, if you attempt to follow the order, I will pull my rib line up away from the iliac, and are seen to be pulling your head back and the top of your sternum back, that is not what we want. So we can reformulate the order to say, I will pull the rib line up away from the iliacs, and I will not let the top of my sternum go backward. Everything in the order is defined, so now we can use our memory to recall these two directions, And when we have a clear conception of the desired act, we can count 1, 2, 3, and perform the movement of the rib line while also preventing the movement of the top of the sternum back. After that, we can add another order. I will pull the rib line up away from the iliac and pull the iliac back and up away from the side of the knee, but I will not let the top of the sternum go backward. As we add more orders, it will obviously become more difficult to remember the orders, but that's okay, because that is the skill that we are developing, the ability to recall multiple orders and perform those multiple orders at once. At first, it may seem impossible to think of so many things simultaneously, but as your skill develops, what once seemed very difficult will come to be pretty easy. The second thing to consider is that you really need to know if you're performing the adjustment correctly or not. To do that, you need some form of objective feedback. While eventually you will be able to make these adjustments without feedback, to begin with, it's quite likely that you would think you're making an adjustment correctly when in fact you are not, because our feeling sense can quite easily deceive us. I will go into more detail on how to get objective feedback in the next installment of this series. But to give you the quick answer, you need either a mirror, a video recording, which can be done with a webcam or any video camera, or you need someone to observe your adjustment. To give a quick example of how this works, say your order is to move the iliacs back and up away from the side of the knee. If you perform the adjustment in front of your webcam, you can see, did your iliac move back in space? Did it move up? I say that in the singular and not plural because to see this clearly, you'll need to stand in profile, so only one of your iliacs will be facing the camera. But because we have clear definitions, we can objectively say if we've moved the iliac backward and upward or not. And if we've failed, we can see what we really did and how that did not line up with our intention. We will further explore how to improve our skill in successfully making adjustments on this channel. And if you'd like more direct assistance, I recommend lessons in the initial Alexander technique. The system I'm laying out for you in these videos is based around the initial Alexander technique. In lessons, which are done one-on-one over Zoom, you will have a teacher helping you generate the appropriate adjustments and understand when you're doing what you've intended to do and when you've done something you intended not to do. More information on getting lessons in the initial Alexander technique will be in the description. Thanks for joining me again today. Questions and comments are always welcome in the comment section below.